Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dustin Robinson, and I am your host for Investor Hotseat, where we ask the tough questions that CEOs need to be prepared to answer. Since this show is about investing, quick disclaimers: we are not soliciting investment on this show, and we encourage you to read the full terms and conditions on the psychedelicinvest.com homepage. The agenda for each one of these episodes is that there will be a 5-minute presentation from the CEO. That will be followed by a 30-minute Q&A by myself, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions whatsoever, just drop them in the comments box, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Greg Mays, the president and CEO of Reunion. Greg, I'm going to pass it to you. You have 5 minutes, and you are on the clock.
All right, Dustin. Well, thank you for welcoming me to the hot seat. I look forward to a little Q&A with you later. But thanks to those who signed in and are watching today. We appreciate the interest in learning more about Reunion Neuroscience, which is a new company that was just established in August of 2022. First, I'd like to just mention a little bit about myself, not because I have a big ego and because I really want to talk about myself, but I do know one thing about biotech. In my over 20 years of management and C-level jobs and operations, I can tell you that the jockey does matter. So a little bit about me, who's running the show now at Reunion Neuroscience. Came into the industry in the late 90s as a corporate attorney handling life science transactional work. Spent time at big pharma and big biotech, rose to become the general counsel of a company called Clone Systems, where we helped engineer and achieve a $6.5 billion exit to Eli Lilly in 2008. From there, I pivoted my career after I ran the integration and merger of Clone into Lilly to operational roles. This is my third CEO job, and I really like the way we sit here at Reunion. It's very similar to opportunities I've had in the past where I've been able to take phase 1 data, phase 1 proof of concept data, identify it, see its promise, see its potential, and then put it through a large, robust phase 2 study, hoping to generate compelling phase 2 data for both patients and investors that have helped create the opportunities for us. My most successful experience was in 2017. I started my own company called Engage Therapeutics, which was developing a rapid epileptic seizure termination inhaler based upon some very early clinical data. We put the product into a large phase 2 study with the backing of very significant institutional healthcare investors, Adage Capital, TPG, Lumira Ventures. And after 2 years of operating the company in 2018 and 2019 in a very significant phase 2 data set, we sold the company to UCB for a 6x investor return. This is just what I hope to do here at Reunion Neuroscience. Again, identifying what we just announced last Monday, which was very successful exit from phase 1 data, and not your garden variety phase 1 study, but in a study looking at 32 patients across 4 cohorts, and not just looking at safety, but looking at pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics, which will help us better understand prospects for the investigational asset RE104 when we do take the product into a more robust setting in phase 2. So why did I join Reunion Neuroscience? Things that I hope Dustin's going to catch up with me on when I talk to him in just a moment. But there are 3 reasons, maybe 4. The first reason is that we are developing 4-hydroxy-DIPT analog. It is the only synthetic psychedelic of its kind in development in the world. And yes, I said the word only. Only is important because nobody else can copy us. Nobody else is developing this product. This makes us very special and one to receive a lot of attention from others. We're not psilocybin. We're not MDMA. We're not LSD. We are 4-hydroxy-DIPT, which allowed us to, number 2, create a new chemical entity. We are the first new chemical entity with phase 1 data in clinical development in the world. But we created a new chemical entity called RE104, which gave us the opportunity to have intellectual property, composition of matter, IP protection out to 2041. It's very significant. I don't believe a lot of investors in the psychedelic space realize that we are one of only 3 companies that's developing a synthetic psychedelic that's in the clinic that has such broad IP protection. And lastly, we believe we will be able to offer patients, providers, and payers the opportunity to have a shorter psychedelic experience. In fact, as we get to it in a minute, our phase 1 data show that we can do it in about half the time of psilocybin. And lastly, I do think it's important you recognize that we at Reunion Neuroscience are being led by a team that has surrounded me and has come to Reunion that has strong clinical and biotech experience bringing assets forward like medicines, not like strange molecules that people have ever thought that would never become medicines before. So I'm super excited about the opportunity, and I welcome Dustin's questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. It's a pleasure to have you on here, and it's very timely to have you on, being that you guys just recently announced the completion of that first interim analysis on your phase 1 clinical trial. So very excited to dig into that. And you gave a great background on yourself. And in all of these investor hot seats, I always ask the why. You covered some of it, but I want to dig a little deeper and understand. I mean, I know this is a different type of industry. This is the psychedelic industry, and everyone has their different reasons for why they're attracted to this particular industry. Were you actually out there looking for an opportunity within the psychedelic space, or was there something about Reunion specifically that really attracted you to this industry and to this company?
No, that's a great question, Dustin. And I actually think people should work obviously where they want to, because in my experiences, when I am most passionate, I'm most successful. When I'm most successful, I can create the greatest impact for both patients and investors. The company I mentioned in the opening was a company called Engage Therapeutics, and that company was in the epilepsy space. And the reason I really found out and learned about that company is because my oldest son has epilepsy, and I became deeply ingrained in the NYU epilepsy community between, let's say, 2014 and 2016. In fact, I feel like NYU was helping my son, and I was helping them as a pharmaceutical and biotech executive, coach and advise them on various projects. So in one time, we sat down and we reviewed the data for the product that ultimately underlied Engage Therapeutics. But that was a successful opportunity. But what people don't understand is that actually the greatest and largest and most significant comorbidity of epilepsy is, in fact, not seizures. It is depression and anxiety. So after I exited the Engage Therapeutics opportunity, I have long wanted to go into the area of depression and anxiety. So when I did learn about the Reunion opportunity, I was very drawn to it because psychedelics do represent the most innovative and novel tool and hope that we can actually put more cases of chronic and severe depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions into remission. So the opportunity, I wanted to go into depression and anxiety. And then when I heard about this psychedelic company that was really sort of in its infancy and was just being launched, I thought, wow, here's my real opportunity to make another difference in another area of major unmet medical need affecting the central nervous system. So that's really how I got into it. I do believe that psychedelics are the future. I think that the safety and efficacy profile of psychedelics is amazing. I've yet in my first 4 months on this job able to find one person who has told me that our investigational asset, like many synthetic psychedelic assets, is not going to work. It's amazing. I've never had this in my 20-year career where people are like, you're going to work. You're going to work. And I'm like, usually I'm used to people telling me like, you're not going to work for this reason or this side effect or what have you. So it's super exciting. And then the other reason I've been really excited about psychedelics is that over my 5 years ago, let's say, I was working at the epilepsy company and I'm learning about psychedelics, and some of these companies are going through IPOs and they're really coming about. I said, great idea. But what I'm really concerned, and I thought they did hold promise and I was interested in them. But my biggest concern was regulatory agency. And over the last year, my observation as someone that's been on the sidelines, but that looks at companies like Reunion Neuroscience, is that really the FDA is looking to become a partner with psychedelic companies. I mean, look, we've got 2 with breakthrough designation status. We've clearly are observing the FDA helping Compass Pathways move into a pivotal phase 3 program following end of phase 2 conversations with the agency. So I think the regulatory agency process is actually warming, which is a real critical factor or risk factor for a lot of companies. So, and I'll tell you one thing, Dustin, the reason why do we think the regulatory environment is warming? Because the FDA and Drug Enforcement Administration and state governments all around there are seeing the same thing that you and I are seeing. They're seeing a global mental health crisis. And they know that psychedelics offer the greatest promise for the near-term future. I mean, I hope there's other new and novel mechanisms that come forward in the future. But right now, here and now, the closest thing to getting the patients and making a difference and putting depressive cases into remission is psychedelics.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And your perspective as a biotech veteran, really, it's very similar to what I've been hearing as I talk to biotech investors or institutional investors, but people who are familiar with the biotech space, they're all excited. They think these compounds will work, but their bigger concern is on the regulatory and also the IP side, which we'll get into in just a bit with respect to you guys. But I want to talk a little bit more. You mentioned in your intro that Reunion is a relatively new company, but you guys were a spin out from Field Trip, and Field Trip was one of the early movers, and they built an absolutely incredible brand. The Field Trip brand almost became synonymous with ketamine clinics or psychedelic clinics, but they decided to spin out their drug development side of things and turn it into Reunion. So could you give us a little bit, I don't know if you were around or part of any of the decision making or anything when they were doing the spin out, but could you give us a little bit more background on why they decided to spin out the drug development side and how they kind of structured that so it worked for all the shareholders?
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. And clearly Field Trip is a pioneer in this space. And, someone that I think Reunion Neuroscience is going to turn back to someday and say, thank you for the great strides you made early on. For those who are listening or just signing in and don't know about Field Trip Health is operating and leading ketamine psychedelic clinics really around the globe. And they have really shown major positive impact on patients. But their principal business was, again, the administration of ketamine and psychotherapy assisted ketamine clinics around the globe. And that, as many of you are listening to, probably recognize that's out-of-pocket cash fee-for-service business. But I will tell you, Dustin, the best decision I think Field Trip ever made was that they hired a key scientist, our chief scientific officer, Dr. Nathan Bryson, and they brought him in and they said, Dr. Bryson, we have a mandate for you. And the mandate is we're going to keep running our psychedelic clinics, but we want to establish a unit inside our company called Field Trip Discovery. You're going to lead Field Trip Discovery, and you're going to identify for us a highly patentable and short duration psychedelic. And that's what Dr. Bryson did. And the success of Field Trip Discovery over the last couple of years led the board of directors of Field Trip Health to say, we have an investor clash. We've got some investors that really like the fact that Field Trip's operating out-of-pocket, fee-for-service type ketamine clinics. But it's a very different business model than a pure play biotech that's bringing forward an asset, 4-hydroxy-DIPT analog, that's actually now been put into phase 1 and is sort of more of a longer term play. Not too long, hopefully, but needs a different set of leaders. So that's really how they split the companies. That happened in August of 2022. And they split the companies right down the middle with a 1-to-1 split between the companies. And now Field Trip, the clinic business is called Field Trip Health and Wellness. And Field Trip Health became Reunion Neuroscience and is now being led by myself as well as others that I have brought into the company to help Dr. Bryson and I move RE104 forward in the clinic.
Yeah, it's I think early on in the industry, there were several companies that were kind of doing the drug development side and the clinics at the same time. And we've learned through some of our investments, for example, we've invested in a company, Awaken, that's doing the clinic and the drug development side. And a lot of investors may like one or the other, right? There's not many investors that like to invest into companies that are doing both of those sides. It's a totally different type of investor that likes, drug development, biotech versus, clinic delivery. So we've witnessed that firsthand, and we've actually been in discussions about, kind of how to address that at that company and other companies we've invested in. So it's really interesting to kind of hear how that all transpired. So I want to talk about your lead program, RE104. Like you were talking about, you wanted to get into something related to depression and mental health. We see a lot of different psychedelic companies going after treatment-resistant depression, major depressive disorder, but you guys have put a very strong focus on postpartum depression. So I want to ask, what made you guys focus on that particular indication?
Sure. So let me, Dustin, great question, because actually there is no psychedelic pursuing postpartum depression here in the United States, which is it makes it a really special program. And let me identify for you a few sort of clinical regulatory reasons, and then I actually want to touch on a couple of business reasons as well. So the first is simply that the level of unmet medical need in postpartum depression is huge. There's only one approved product in postpartum depression, and that drug has demonstrated some therapeutic benefit, but it must be administered as an inpatient over a 60-hour period with a continuous intravenous infusion. So we'd like to think that there's actually a better solution in that area, one that could be more scalable and efficacious. Secondly, in contrast to treatment-resistant depression, where patients have at least failed 2 prior pharmacologic therapies, and then they continue to fail. They're failing these 2. Postpartum depression patients are experiencing an acute de novo depressive episode that has not recently been pre-treated for. So there's no prior lines of therapy. So administering a fast-acting psychedelic in this patient population, we think will have greater effect. And then lastly, in postpartum depression specifically, there is a real need to restore or facilitate the mother and infant-child bonding. So if you're out getting a 60-hour infusion and you can't return to breastfeeding because you have to go through an extended washout period, that's going to be a problem. So we think that actually a psychedelic like RE104 can offer a distinct advantage in this setting, because our psychedelic will have the profile that will allow for a faster washout, fast onset of action. Within 24 hours, there should be some sort of impact to the woman, and then within 24 to 48 hours after that period, should be able to wash out the psychedelic and be able to return to bonding and breastfeeding. I mean, I don't know if you know this statistic, but the CDC, Dustin, recently shared that 80% of the women that die in the first year between childbirth and a year out from childbirth die due to an overdose or death by suicide. So it's a really awful state of depression. I think we can make a difference. But on the business side, it's also really important to me, because look, most of the companies that are going for psychedelic drug development programs all suffer like you and I. I mean, suffer like us. You got to be careful with their cash, and it's a very difficult environment to be raising money. So postpartum depression, I really like, because it's a niche population. Let's face it, right? So it's a smaller patient population, which allows for smaller trials, which allows for quicker timelines, and it's going to, quite frankly, allow Reunion Neuroscience to get to a data inflection point by the end of 2024. And that's what everybody wants. Everybody, from strategics to patients to investors right now, they want to see meaningful phase 2 data. And I can get there with postpartum depression by the end of 24.
That's great. That's great. So I wanted to now talk about the actual compound itself. The compound itself, one of the main characteristics is its short duration. So I want to talk a little bit about this duration, because it's a hot topic within the psychedelic industry. I want to first contrast your compound, your lead compound, with some of the longer duration psychedelics. And then I also want to contrast it to some of the shorter duration psychedelic compounds as well. So on the long duration side, the positive thing about the long duration psychedelics like psilocybin, MDMA, LSD is that we have a really strong history of safety and efficacy. These these long duration psychedelics, the traditional psychedelics, tend to really work, right? And they tend to be very safe. And now what you're trying to do is you're trying to shorten that duration, right? And hope that you're still going to get that same safety and efficacy out of the compound. Is there any concern there that perhaps this longer duration trip, maybe 6 to 8 hours, is actually necessary? Or do you have any data supporting that maybe these shorter duration psychedelic compounds will be just as efficacious as these longer duration psychedelic compounds?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dustin. And it's a question of really, as you know, quite robust clinical and scientific debate right now across the field of psychedelic medicine. In fact, many are questioning whether any psychoactive state is necessary for a treatment response, as I think as you're alluding to. Never mind, let alone if it's a long or short psychedelic experience. What I can tell you here today is that we don't have any data to suggest a shorter or longer psychedelic experience correlates with better or worse outcomes. But what we do know is that achieving a high quality or complete mystical experience as measured by validated FDA protocols and outcome tools does predict a potent psychedelic experience and treatment response in patients with depression and anxiety and even substance abuse disorder. So our goal at Reunion Neuroscience really is, and I'm sure we will get to this shortly, is to use our phase 1 study to select a dose for RE104 that results in the most subjects reporting a complete mystical experience with acceptable safety. So we're focused on the mystical experience. I don't think anybody has data right now, whether they would like to or not, showing that whether a shorter or longer is going to result in a better outcome for patients.
Absolutely. And to the extent you're able to, get this trip down to, I think from what I understand, it's a 3 to 4 hour experience with your lead candidate. And to the extent you could get that down from what Compass's product is, which is 6 to 8 hours, obviously that's very helpful for patients if they don't need to be in the clinic for as long. And so I want to now contrast this with some of the shorter duration psychedelic companies. So we see companies like Cybin, Beckley Psytech, GH Research, Elucis, a lot of different companies right now trying to develop these short duration psychedelic compounds. And it seems like the time frame they're all going for is around 45 minutes to 1 hour. Even Small Pharma, which is developing a DMT compound, is trying to extend that DMT experience to get it within this 45-minute to 1 hour range. So I'm going to kind of ask the opposite question. To the extent that some of these shorter duration companies are successful in improving efficacy, do you think that poses any sort of threat to your compound that may last 3 to 4 hours versus their compound that might be anywhere from 30 minutes to 1 hour?
Right. So, I mean, right now you'd think we are the first company to show a 3 to 4 hour psychedelic administration, and we reported that last Monday. So we're clearly, I think as an industry, I'd like to say we're moving in the right direction now, but the bulk of the robust clinical evidence to support psychedelic treatment response in patients with mental health conditions like depression and anxiety and PTSD, Dustin, is really limited to psilocybin and MDMA. We have very little data to validate the same level of efficacy with DMT-like compounds. There's no knowledge of durability beyond 1 week. RE104 is unique in that the parent molecule 4-hydroxy-DIPT, which was identified in the 1950s by Dr. Alexander Shulgin, has the most unique characteristic about it is that it has a receptor binding profile that overlaps with psilocybin. So that positions RE104 for delivering comparable or better efficacy based upon the established pharmacology of psilocybin. So offering a shorter duration psychoactive experience that may benefit patients and providers and healthcare resources that's similar to psilocybin is really where we're focused. And we'll wait to see data from some of the others, but right now it's just not there.
Yeah, and you mentioned durability, and we've also seen some issues on durability with Compass's trial with respect to psilocybin, and I think they might be addressing some of those durability issues in their phase 3 trials by adding additional dosages, additional administration sessions. So I'm just curious from your perspective, and I'm sure some of this will be fleshed out throughout the trials, but is your vision kind of a one and done type of treatment plan, or do you expect for durability maybe that there'll be a couple different administration sessions when when your product is delivered to patients?
No, it's now that you're really hitting on some of the finer points that sort of start to differentiate folks. But currently, our development program with RE104 is focused on, obviously, as we talked about earlier, postpartum depression rather than refractory depression. So we are studying, and we think with the postpartum depression indication, we are studying a single dose in this population that we will expect will have rapid effect measured at 24 hours, as I mentioned, after administration. And then we're going to follow the durability out to 30 days. Again, it's more of an episodic, not chronic condition. So there is no repeat dosing planned in our first phase 2 study, but we do expect to go into other indications, maybe treatment-resistant depression, maybe some other more chronic depressions, mental health conditions, substance use disorders. And I think we're going to have to consider repeat dosing. In fact, from my perspective as, really just an advocate for psychedelics, I really do feel like the only question I have right now is, how long does one administration of psilocybin last? How long, what's the durability of RE104? And, and right now we see Compass data that suggests that it looks like it's out to about 12 weeks, but look, maybe ultimately psychedelics become something like having our teeth cleaned. For those with chronic depression, we return to our psychiatrist clinic every 6 months until we feel better about ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction you made on postpartum versus MDD or TRD or some of these other more chronic forms of depression. Postpartum is just for certain period of time after after you've had your baby, so it makes sense that maybe perhaps just one dose for this particular indication would be sufficient rather than repetitive dosing. So that's a really important distinction that you made. So I want to now jump into those clinical trial results that we keep referencing. So could you tell me a little bit about how the phase 1 trial design, how it was all designed, and also what the key takeaways were from these interim results?
Yeah, no, I'm super excited too. And as you mentioned at the outset, Dustin, the timing for our call couldn't be more perfect. But last Monday we had an opportunity to announce the results of a long-awaited, and I hate to say it, but not a garden variety phase 1. When I came into my job a few months ago, people would be like, phase 1, okay, what are you going to show me? 10 patients in your psychedelic molecule didn't kill anybody? Is that what you're trying to aim to show? And it's like, no. We expected to show a lot more than safety and tolerability. So this is a real important milestone for the company. It now positions us, really, as I sit here today speaking to you, that we're a phase 2A ready company. But RE104 showed robust and pervasive pharmacodynamic effects in addition to safety and efficacy. And as we've been talking, Dustin, we clearly showed that the duration of our psychedelic experience is 3 to 4 hours versus 6 and much longer hours with some of the other known generic-based psychedelics. So importantly, so that was one thing that we duration of effect, safe and tolerable. And then lastly, we also identified a dose level where the majority of patients who received a single administration of RE104 achieved what I referred to earlier as a complete mystical experience. Now, some people don't know what a complete mystical experience is. It's something that actually the researchers at Johns Hopkins rely upon a lot, and other people, it's a validated PRO or patient-reported outcome. And it's defined as a score of at least 60% in each of the 4 domains of the validated mystical experience questionnaire. So a complete mystical experience has been shown to correlate with psychedelic treatment responses in clinical trials of people looking at depression, anxiety, and mental health conditions. So this is super exciting that we were able to show how we could achieve a mystical experience in 60% or more of the patients at a certain dosing level. The details of this study will be available later this half of the year at a major medical meeting, and we look forward to presenting much more detailed information about the prospects for RE104, in postpartum depression and potential other indications.
And so could you walk us through the timeline for RE104? When do you expect to be starting your phase 2 clinical trials? And if all kind of goes according to plan, around what time period would you expect, phase 3 and then full approval of your compound?
Yeah, so basically what we plan to do is, as a small company, we only have 15 employees. I like to have very narrowly tailored focus goals. So first goal of 2023, check the box on that. I wanted to produce phase 1 results that were going to be interesting and compelling and lined us up for starting a phase 2 study in postpartum depression. We only have 2 more goals the rest of this year. One is open up the investigational new drug application with the FDA to start the phase 2 in postpartum depression. And the third goal is to start dosing patients in 2023 in patients with postpartum depression. Beyond that, it's all gravy, but I want to make sure we are continuing to, manage our cash appropriately. Beyond 2023, I think what I tell investors, and I'm going to hold myself accountable for, is that we will have compelling phase 2 data set by the end of 2024. And from my perspective, that's not too far out there. So we would have phase 2 data in 2024. Beyond that, we're anticipating a regulatory approval in 2028 is how we see it lining up, which is actually great because based upon the way Dr. Bryson engineered the 4-hydroxy-DIPT molecule, and by putting a prodrug onto the 4-hydroxy-DIPT molecule, we created a new chemical entity. The new chemical entity earned composition of matter patent protection out to 2041 in early 2022. So super excited about our opportunity to look into other areas of exploration and clinical development beyond postpartum depression, should we have the financial resources to do so.
Yeah, and so speaking of financial resources, thus far we've only talked about RE104, but I know you guys have the RE200 series, and obviously your resources are finite. So, there's only so much capital you could deploy to different programs. So I'm just curious, the RE200, is that something that's kind of on the back burner, or are you guys actually allocating time and resources to that series of compounds? And if so, where are you at with respect to that series of compounds?
Right. So with respect to RE200, we hope to name a clinical candidate in 2023. But obviously, again, 90% of the company is focused on RE104. So I'd say that RE200 is slightly on the back burner. It's on a slow simmer, but we are moving it. We do plan to move it forward. And as soon as we get RE104 out the door and moving forward into phase 2, it'll continue to be a priority for us. I mean, for those who don't know that are just checking in, RE200 is our second generation, or actually we call RE104 a second generation psychedelic. So really RE200 is more like a third generation psychedelic therapeutic option for us. With this compound looks at both serotonin 2A and serotonin 2B agonism. And we hope that ultimately by way we're able to block the serotonin 2B agonism, we may be putting ourselves in a position to actually monitor or better protect patients from cardiotoxicity issues associated with serotonin 2B. If we're able to successfully do that, we could potentially look at more chronic dosing of RE200 series. We're also looking at the RE200 series, like many other people, is how could we further minimize the psychedelic experience and potentially eliminating it so people could actually take the products at home and not be monitored or have to go through a preparation phase.
Yeah, lots of companies looking into those non-hallucinogenic psychedelic compounds, which sounds a little bit like a paradox, but it's very interesting space, and very little research supporting it thus far, but a lot of research coming out. So very excited to see where that turns out. So let's discuss the financials for just a minute. What is the current cash position of Reunion, and what is your current monthly burn?
Sure. Obviously, it's nuts and bolts. And in November, our last quarterly report, we reported $28 million US on our balance sheet, and our monthly burn is about $1.5 million a month. So we do have sufficient cash to take us through 2023. I do feel like we're in a relatively strong position. But I also look at the opportunity for RE104 and our IP life cycle as long and robust. So there are more things I'd like to do if we're able to secure additional financial resources.
And just so for our investors out there, so your cash position, I believe your market value of your company is below your cash position. Is that correct?
It is.
That's always interesting from an investment perspective to see companies like yours with relatively strong cash positions, but trading below that cash number. So, why do you think that is? Any comments on that in particular?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think towards the end of the year, you saw a lot of tax-based selling in sort of a bad year. I think the macro headwinds are incredibly tough right now for companies that are considered to be micro cap or in sort of the sub $50 million range. And then I think also, Dustin, you saw psychedelics. They sort of got off to a fast start, and they have sort of increasingly fallen backwards with this sort of 22-month decline in the XBI or NASDAQ-based biotechnology indexes. So what I believe is that yes, I'm trading at an enterprise value that is negative right now. I don't believe it's negative. I actually, with our phase 1 data out right now, I feel like we're in a really strong position of strength. And what I see for the entire psychedelic sector really right now is going to be sort of a second rebirth. I see a lot of data catalysts coming out this year. I see Compass making great way forward. I see the prospect for MDMA being approved in post-traumatic stress disorder in the next 365 days. So I think there's a lot, so what I do think is I think you're going to see a rebound. I think you saw a lot of hype, but no science for psychedelics, and they eventually fell backwards. But now what you're going to see is the promise of psychedelics are now starting to be supported by clinical and regulatory data that supports that these products are going to achieve the great hope that they once, sort of came to the marketplace with.
Yeah, I always say that science is objective to market conditions. So as long as the science could continue to prove out, eventually the markets will adjust. And I also say that, money is made not in high markets, it's in low markets, right? You want to invest low, sell high. So I think it's an interesting time to potentially get involved in the psychedelic industry. So I just got one last question, then we're going to jump into the Q&A. So if anyone wanted to learn more about Reunion, where should they go? If you want to drop the ticker symbol, what exchanges you guys are listed on, just this is your opportunity to kind of direct people to where they should be going if they want to learn more.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity, Dustin. And, the hot seat's been pretty hot, but it's, I appreciate you turning down the temperature for me on one question. So we're actually duly listed. We're on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. We're listed at RE. Our ticker symbol is REUN. You can also catch me and Reunion on Twitter and LinkedIn, trying to raise the exposure of a company that really nobody ever knew before August 11th of 2022. I mean, we were sort of tucked away in field trip health as field trip discovery. And now we're really starting to sort of, I think establish some traction. I mean, I believe that with our IP and our data and the team we are building and the fact that we are the only 4-hydroxy DIPT molecule in development, that honestly, my personal goal is in 6 months, there's some top names in this sector that Dustin, you cover and you talk about all the time. I want us to be mentioned in the same paragraph or maybe even sentence with some of those companies. And I think it's attainable. But in any event, in the meantime, check us out on the web, and we're going to, continue. I'm not a CEO in a closet, is what I always say. So I answer questions, and I will talk to anybody about the company because I believe in this space. I believe there's a huge unmet medical need. I think psychedelics can fulfill that unmet medical need, and I think Reunion is nicely positioned to differentiate itself and bring forth some really good results for patients.
Absolutely appreciate that. All right, let's jump into the Q&A. First question we have is from Charlie Rose. The question is, can you speak about why Reunion's drug program is explicitly focused on the serotonin system? Did the umbrella review of the studies that was published earlier this year and suggest that the chemical imbalance theory may not be as accurate as previously thought have any influence on your R&D?
Hey, thanks, Charlie, for the question. I wish Dr. Bryson had been here. You're catching a guy that's only been in the hot seat as CEO for 4 months, but I'm happy to answer that question. I mean, basically, what we're targeting here in our research and development program is going after the serotonin 2A. That is what seems to be making a difference. We haven't been influenced by any other sort of studies. What we're trying to do, as I mentioned to Dustin earlier, is really show overlapping pharmacology to psilocybin, but also show our differences to psilocybin. So psilocybin really is, our marker, and that's what's been the greatest influence on us. So we wanted to overcome, we wanted to overcome 2 weaknesses with psilocybin. One, its lack of intellectual property that will extend the opportunity for a generic psilocybin. And 2, we wanted to overcome the inherent weaknesses and patient intimidation and provider and payer expense of a very long psychedelic experience. So we've studied psilocybin. We're cheering its development on, but we think that we can be an important 2nd generation psilocybin analog with sufficient IP protection.
Great. And I see we do not have any further questions. So I know it's MLK Day, so I know there's a lot of people taking off. So I appreciate you making it on, Greg, on a national holiday. But yeah, you made it through the hot seat. Congratulations. Thank you so much for joining. Any last words, last comments you want to leave the audience with?
No, we're always working, and I was thrilled that it was on MLK Day because I gave me time to, sort of just get ready and reflect on what I wanted to share with you. But look, I look forward to sharing updates and progress with you and the rest of the psychedelic community as we move forward. And thanks for the opportunity, Dustin.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the audience for joining. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.